This is David having a conversation with 1Drea. I'm in Israel and 1Drea is in the south of France, and we're going to have a wonderful chat. So thank you so much for joining me, 1Drea.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we chatted a year ago and you got my creative juices going, and I've been following your work since then, and you are a very busy, creative, expressive, multidisciplinary, diverse human being. It's amazing what you're doing. So just thank you for bringing those gifts to the world. It's awesome and inspiring to see.
Thank you. It's definitely been an interesting life, and it keeps getting more and more interesting each year.
Yeah, yeah. It's precious, isn't it? And there's one question I really want to just start with is, from looking at your work, the energies of transformation, self-love, authenticity, and healing keep coming up. And I think an interesting question to start with is around your name and the evolution of your name, and how that kind of tracks with the evolution of your healing journey, and your kind of revelation of self-authenticity. So can we just explore that as a nice intro?
Sure. Um, well, I have to go back in time, 53 years to my birth. Uh, I was born in America. I was born 1Drea Pennington, and I really grew up with a very toxic and dysfunctional household. And it was a childhood that was very much marked by what we call adverse childhood experiences. If you're familiar with that ACEs quiz, my score was 7, which is really high. More than 3 on the ACE score typically means you're going to have some sort of mental health or physical health challenge. And I did. I basically remember being depressed from my childhood all the way up into my 30s, including having suicidal ideations in my early teenage years. And I say all of that to say my life was pretty much marked by depression, and also not really feeling like I belonged in this world. I didn't have a very religious upbringing, but there was this sort of awareness that there was a realm, a spirit realm, and I always had this feeling that I was better off there than here on earth. And it really came to a head in when I went to medical school. I really found myself struggling with depression, mainly because all through childhood, I was heavily involved in the arts. That was sort of like my saving grace, like being around artists, musicians, actors. That's what kind of gave me a sense of joy. And then when I got to medical school, I had to squash all of that because it was so incredibly intense, and I felt like I had to keep up with everyone. And it was the first time that I realized I really needed support. It was the first time I really got into psychotherapy and even tried antidepressants, which unfortunately for me didn't work. It left me feeling flat. It didn't give me any relief. But the interesting thing was there was a doctor who had interviewed me at the beginning of my interview cycle for medical school, and she remembered that I was a musician. And so when I reported to student health complaining of depression, she asked me, well, how much are you playing the piano every week? And I was like, I don't have time for that. What are you talking about? And she said, well, why don't you play piano for 30 minutes a day? And again, I looked at her like she was crazy. Like, where am I going to find that time? But she was right. When I started to tune back into music, I started to feel alive again. I made it through medical school. I got to my residency at Georgetown Hospital in DC, once again, kind of dipping into low moods. And I really found myself struggling. Again, I turned to the arts. It's where I felt like I was receiving that lifeline. So I was basically living these two lives. You talked about me being busy. I was doing
Yes.
lots in the creative realm and lots in the medical realm. And then I got recruited by the Discovery Channel. They had just launched the Discovery Health Network, which has now been created as the Oprah Winfrey Network. And at the time, I thought, okay, this is great. I'm going to be able to be creative, be on TV. I opened a wellness center, and things were kind of chiming along. until a few years in, I started to feel this sense of a lack of integrity because in my practice, I was using acupuncture and a holistic framework for healing, working with people with substance use disorder and eating disorders. And I was finding that there were these breakthroughs happening. And it wasn't just your standard medical therapy. And when I took that to my colleagues at the TV network, they were like, "Yeah, we're not going to bring that on TV because that just sounds woo woo. It sounds like you need to be out in California." And so it was really frustrating to see that I was having amazing success in my wellness center, and I couldn't bring that to the rest of the country. And that was really the beginning of this sense of dis-ease and the depression coming back with incredible force. It led me to once again feeling like I didn't want to be on the planet anymore. And we can maybe talk about it or not, but you've seen my TED Talk. I did have a near death experience in 2005, right at the height of all of the success and pseudo fame. But it really led me to question everything. And shortly thereafter, I was led onto a shamanic path. So I'm getting to your question about the name change. What I'm setting up here is that there was this feeling of I wanted to be in the spirit world. I wanted to be performing and using all of my energy and all of who I am. But within the medical paradigm, I was always being boxed in. Within the media paradigm, once again being boxed in. And as I started exploring shamanism, I got tapped into a group in Maryland who were doing MDMA therapy. And then I discovered that there was all this research on MDMA for PTSD and for depression and couples therapy. And it just opened my mind because I was hearing about people tapping into this sort of expanded state of consciousness and opening the heart and experiencing love, which was what I experienced in my near-death experience. And it just led me to explore. I eventually heard the call to sit with the great mother, ayahuasca, and it rocked my world. Um, I've sat with the grandmother, I think 11 or 12 times, and the most recent time was just a couple of years ago, where I thought I was fine. I had dealt with so much of my family trauma and like let it go. I was feeling good, feeling free. But there came a moment in one of the ceremonies where I was returning to a very deep sense of wrongness, like something was wrong with me. I wasn't showing up the way I wanted to as a mother, and I was in this loop. And you know how that can be when you're in those states. It's like whew. I went up to the ayahuasquera, and she did special prayers and blessings, and was like gave me another cup, and I'm like, I couldn't seem to purge. Eventually, on the fourth cup, I saw these visions, and I heard a voice. And you know how it is. Yes, ayahuasca is a hallucinogen, but this voice was so powerful. And it basically was giving me an opportunity to make a shift. And the first time I heard it, I said no. The next night, I was in the same turmoil again. By the time I got to my fourth cup, the voice came back. And I said yes. And as soon as I said yes to this horrible question for me, I had to grab my bucket and I started to purge. And with that purge, I could see from me as a baby to that point, it was as if I was purging that timeline. What I realized is who I had become because I grew up with so much trauma. I felt stuck. I felt like I couldn't get out of the loop, even with this powerful medicine. And what she gave me was the opportunity to purge that. By the third time I'm heaving over the bucket, I knew I'm being reborn. I felt like this was a rebirth, and I knew I can't I can't use that old name. I'm letting go of that entire timeline, that trauma timeline. And lo and behold, it came to me shortly thereafter, my new name. My full name now is Deas 1Drea Pennington Wasio. And yeah, it led to a total rebirth and a total embracing of all of who that I was and am, and who I envision I will be going forward. So that's the long story.
Well, I'm pleased we got that out of the way. That was
Yeah.
a beautiful, yeah, beautiful um, expression of the journey that you're on, that you've been through since birth, 50 something years ago, and it's fascinating what our name holds in a sense, and particularly just hearing you speaking, 1Drea, about the ability to take all of the experiences since birth and have every moment of that life force, experience, identity, story healed or kind of transformed, or putting all of that in a sense through some kind of a process, rather than just one juncture, one experience, one relationship with somebody, or one memory. Because I do think we carry so much deep within us that I think it's very easy for us to even forget or not know that it exists, because we often just on the surface, or maybe we're a couple of layers down, and okay, I'm healing that part of my childhood when that happened with my dad, or when that happened at college. And there's some deep healing in each of those moments, very powerful. And at the same time, there's often this, I don't know what word to use, but there's almost like an organic kind of deep in our, kind of in the mud, in the in the roots of who
Mm.
we are, that has become ingrained, like the seed of a pearl, that we have built our sense of self. It's almost like a default assumption that's like, oh yeah, that's just who I am, or that's just part of my life, or that's how I always react, or that's just my personality. But really, I think if we're in the field of transformation, then everything is up for transformation. It's ultimately, we don't know what there is to transform and not to transform. And just very briefly, I've been feeling lately, I've got quite a bit of stuff that I just haven't been able to get to yet. So I'm still in that stage before you had that experience. And I'm right now living in a war zone, and that's bringing up a lot of stuff. And it's like really reminding me of that. It's like, ah, shit, God, that's it's still there. I really feel that it's being brought to the surface. Whereas normally in life, you can get by without noticing it, or without wanting to notice it. So it takes some kind of, I don't know, what was it about that moment, just to hone in on that experience for you, 1Drea? What was it about the moment, that on that second time of hearing the voice, where was there a conscious, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this, I need to do this, I want to do this? What was that kind of invitation response that you kind of went through that first and second time?
Mm. Well, I have to say that there had been a few years leading up to this that I had sat with ayahuasca as well as psilocybin mushrooms. And during the period of COVID, I lost a dear friend to cancer, another dear friend to suicide. Then my mother had a stroke and I couldn't fly to America because of COVID. And then eventually my mother transitioned the following year. So I had been doing a whole lot of grief work and just unburdening myself of a lot of different stories, a lot of different beliefs that I didn't even know I had. And that's one of the reasons why I'm actually doing work with psychedelics now as a form of healing trauma. But when I got to that exact moment, I think the interesting thing was, because I'd done so much work through COVID and really healed a lot of trauma. Like, I went into that ayahuasca week, I was actually a guest teacher. So I was just kind of like feeling good. I was like rocking and rolling. I was like, I'm here to be of service to others. I was invited to sit with the medicine. So of course I said yes, but I thought, I'm good. Like, what's there going to be? And I think I was shocked. Like you said, the psyche is just so clever. The human psyche can wall away and hide things from us that our conscious mind isn't even aware of. But by being willing to say yes, by being willing to surrender, you give this permission for things to come up. And that's what I did in that medicine ceremony. I just said, show me what I need to get to the next level. And to be honest, the things that I was struggling with was very personal. It was my relationship with my daughter. I have been super close with my daughter, obviously since birth, but we moved here when she was 4.5. We've traveled the world together, and the thing that came up for me was just feeling like I wasn't a good enough mom. And I couldn't shake it. Like all of the positive psychology I know, all of the other work that I know, I couldn't shake that loop. And to be honest, the pain that I felt during that ceremony, I felt like I'm a horrible mom. I can't seem to get it right. I couldn't forgive myself. That was the biggest problem for me. I couldn't forgive myself. And the thing that just shifted was as I was crying my eyes out on this mattress, eventually I was shown a picture of me as a baby. And it was like in an instant, I was like, right, of course you grew up to be this person. And I just sort of like remembered the trauma, the things that that little baby absorbed in our toxic household. And as soon as I saw her, the baby version of me, I just like wept with compassion. And I said, I forgive you. And as soon as I forgave this early version of me, that's when it was like, oh, okay, here comes the purge. I'm about to let this go. And it really took that. It really took, I couldn't forgive me as an adult because I'm like, you know better. Why hasn't this been better? But as soon as I could see where all of my behaviors started, it was that led me to really be able to be willing to let go of everything, because the pain was so intense that I didn't think there was anything
Mm.
else. I just thought I've got to get rid of this pain.
And prior to then, it sounds like that pain was part of your default operating system in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a part of me that was a very big perfectionist. And so, when I became pregnant, I was 34 and I was like, wow, this is a miracle. And so I went hardcore into all of the attachment parenting stuff and just doing everything that I possibly could, got into therapy, worked on myself because I didn't want to reproduce what I experienced as a child. And so I took this on as this major challenge. And I could see through that I had become very attached to this idea that I had to be perfect. Even though I would have never said that consciously, like, no, I know I just need to be a good enough parent and I've already been great and my child is healthy. We have a great relationship. But during that moment, I had seen that I was really stuck. And it was because that perfectionist part wasn't able to give me a break.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's interesting how perfectionism shows itself up, and it might not seem like I'm a perfectionist, but yeah, it's that. Yeah, I can relate to that. To be honest, that kind of rigidity, and um, the other side of it for you was that where a lot of this self love has been flowing out of since that experience, or was that already part of your process before that?
Yeah, it was part of my process before. Um, as I was running an intensive outpatient program for binge eating disorder in the early 2000s, right when I started working with Discovery, um, we were finding that we created this very holistic paradigm for helping people break free from addiction and compulsive behaviors. And we had acupuncture and psychology. We had a holistic spa and salon, fitness and nutrition, like everything you would need to really break free. And yet, most people would like take off and they would soar. They would get healthy and they would just rock. But there was like a small subset of our patients that would kind of circle the drain. They'd either switch addictions or somehow they'd sabotage their program. And, as a young physician, I was just like, why is this? What's going on? And as I started digging into it, we had a beautiful multidisciplinary team. What I started to hear was that there were people who didn't believe that they were worthy of love. They didn't believe they were worthy of success. They didn't even believe they were worthy of vitality. And those beliefs were tied to their identity, which you and I have been talking about. All of my work now is centered around identity because it's who we believe we are and what we're worthy or capable of that will then influence our behaviors. It influences our physiology and our health or lack thereof. And when I discovered that, I realized we've got to help people like rewrite their version of themselves, changing their narrative from being a victim to eventually a hero or heroine. But first, it really required that we identify, where did you get these beliefs? And when I started to hear them, it was the first time that I was like, oh, snap. Yeah, I guess I couldn't really say that I love myself. I really believed that I was only worthy of love if I was getting good grades, getting some accomplishment. It was very conditional. So it was in, the early 2000s that I really started this work on self-love and resilience and post-traumatic growth. And it's also when I really went hard on my own healing journey. So it's been going ever since then. In 2008, I launched something called the Real Self Love Movement. I was still in Washington, D.C. at the time, and just wanted to help people learn to love themselves just as I was learning to love myself. And now, all these years later, we host a monthly meetup on Zoom. It's totally free, giving people access to downloadable meditations and interviews. And then I do group coaching and host an attunement meditation each month. So, as a physician, I just recognize that without self love, without true unconditional self acceptance, it's really hard to be healthy.
Yeah, thanks for expressing that so well. And I worked in addiction quite a lot as a social worker and a therapist. And I also would notice why certain people were kind of coming in and out of rehab and detox and the IOP programs that I worked at. And it was definitely self-love and identity, as you were saying, and that belief that I can change, I can be someone different, I can do things differently, I can stop fucking up, I can be respected, I can, do the other things that I haven't done, and I'm not just going to repeat the same story again and again. So many people that I was working with, just the clients, just couldn't get out of that loop. And the more times I've been in and out of rehab and getting, with food stamps and even on Suboxone and things like that, it's just, there was still part of them that was stuck in that I'm still a piece of shit. I'm not going to change myself, and no one believes in me. And ultimately, I left my job because I wanted to start working with psychedelics with my clients, and I couldn't. And I just couldn't live with myself not being able to offer them psychedelic-assisted therapy, because there's something there about like your experience purging and just surrendering that, going, I really just need whatever it is I need. Can I just please be open to that, please, and believe that I deserve it and that it is possible to receive it, and then I'll do whatever is required of me once I receive that to make sense of it and integrate that. And I feel like that's something different with psychedelics and therapy, and it's part of that hero's journey. That okay, we all get stuck in the weeds, we all get trauma and have really challenging experiences, but how do we get through that? And there's a piece around retreats I'd love to talk about maybe in a little while. And I think it gives us, as a hero's journey, it gives us this, blank slate with beautiful people, with beautiful places, with really nurturing professional setting and energy to surrender, to kind of go into that place of, that dark cave, and then to come out of it the other end and make sense of it. But yeah, the hero's journey, let's start with that. So what does that mean to you, and how does that inform your personal experience you've been through and how you work with your clients and community?
Hmm. Well, I started really diving into the hero's journey when I was at university studying theater. We were forced to read The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. And actually, this book, um, Sacred Medicine, is exploring the psychedelic hero's journey. Um, so for me, it really is a journey of self discovery. And even though in most heroines' journey, they're battling external demons or dragons, for most of us, it's really battling the things within us, those internalized voices, the inner critic, and all of those things. So for me, I see the heroes and the heroines' journey as a part of everyone's life. And we don't just go through them once. Like if you really look through your life, you can see that you've gone through these heroic journeys from birth to now. And I feel like it's a useful metaphor, because what I found is, we've been talking a lot about things that get repressed and things that are stuck in the unconscious. And by looking at the way that Joseph Campbell gave us this framework and like plotting your life, it starts to bring things up to our conscious awareness. And because humans are so good at recognizing patterns, what I found with my clients is that they could start to externalize a bit and say, oh, if I were just a character, yeah, this is why I picked up victim mentality. This is why I felt like I was at the mercy of everything in the universe. But then in the hero's journey, there comes this moment where the hero says, okay, I got to do something different. I've got to cross that threshold into the unknown, accept that I may need help from new allies. And they eventually go to, some sort of deep cave or deep battle. And what I found with clients is when they look at it that way, it gives them a sense of agency. And as you probably know, in the world of self-efficacy and such, we have to have a sense of agency in order to really make positive change in our lives. And when people could recognize that they've just been playing out a script and they can take up the pen and the paper or the cape and become the hero of that story, it gives them back this sense of agency. And so early on, when I was studying positive psychology and discovered the work of James Pennebaker, which uses narrative therapy, so it's writing or writing therapy, I found that it helped my clients who had somewhat like you were talking about, these deeply entrenched beliefs that they were crap and that they couldn't change. But as they started to do these writing exercises, there was this shift that turned. And so I have focused on the hero's journey a lot, because I think that if everyone could look, just have a different perspective to look at their lives, it might empower them to make changes in a different way. Because ultimately, when you see that hero's journey, the hero eventually gets to a point of having a new identity. Psychedelics help, as you heard in my case, like you purge out an old identity, go through a rebirth, and you are something new. Everyone has an opportunity to be born again, whatever that looks like, or some sort of, phoenix rising from the sun, from the ashes moment and taking off toward the sun. But we have to take that leap. We have to like consciously say, all right, someone guide me, someone show me the path, or you pick up a book that becomes your guide and you do this.
Beautiful. Beautiful. There's something particularly about working with people struggling with substance use and with eating disorders, as you've done, that has just so much potential for transformation there. Because often they're in such a difficult bind, and there's so much kind of repetitive nature to their life. And I think psychedelic therapy has huge potential for so many different conditions, and just for life itself, without needing a condition or diagnosis, but especially looking at addiction and eating disorders that, which have really, really low outcomes. Just looking at, evidence-based practice, it's, really not great stuff. And you also mentioned narrative therapy. It's really interesting because maybe 10 years ago, I started to realize, why am I working like this with my clients? And I did a bit of research, like, I think I'm a narrative therapist doing narrative therapy. And I've always been a writer. I literally yesterday was reading my first ever journal entries when I was 12 years old in England. I'm just remembering it. I snogged my first girl. In England, that's kissing, snogging, French kissing. Oh, you're in France, so you know what that is, yeah. Literally, I was 12 years old, and I was like, that's the first thing I ever wrote. And I wrote ever since. I'm 45 now, and I've probably got 20 books more, 30 books, and probably 500 poems. And writing's been a part of my life. And that and psychedelics and cannabis and meditation have been things that have kept me alive and helped me with my mental health. But there's something about the process of writing, I think neurologically, and I would defer to you if you know more about the details of the neurology and of what writing does and the parts of the brain it taps into, but perhaps more archetypally, what it feels like to have a blank piece of paper and a quill or a keypad to create, to express. Everything's okay. Whatever I write, this is just for me. And for parts of ourselves to, in a sense, have voices and to start to meet each other. Like from an IFS perspective, we have so much complexity that we can express, I think, from that slowed down, kind of narrative process. And so when I've worked with clients, it's been really effective to say, imagine, yeah, like you are in charge of your life and you can create, your ideal day, or what aspects of yourself, would you really want to amplify, and how would that feel? Imagine what that feels like to handle that situation or have that relationship in that way. There's just something there about, I think it makes us not so submissive, stepping into that power of being our own author. I think it gives us that self-belief, creativity, and inspiration a little bit. So yeah, I don't know where you want to
Yeah.
go with that. What are some of your thoughts around this topic?
I love that. I love what you shared. I do find that the creative process opens up a new channel for people, and it's something that many of us had as children, and then we put it to the side, like this imagination and what would life be like if only I. And well, I'll say this. There have been hundreds of studies since James Pennebaker started this in the 80s, and in one of his very, very first trials. It was, of course, using college students, and they were given an exercise over 4 days. And the thing was, you go home and you write for 20 to 30 minutes without thinking of editing. You're not going to turn this in, nobody's going to look at it, but you write about the most stressful period of your life, and you just write for 20 to 30 minutes. And you did that in those days, you did it 4 days consecutively. You could be writing about the same story. You could use bad words. You could use anything, hopefully getting as much of the emotions out and as expressive as possible. And then on the fifth day, he would have them just sort of say, okay, what did you learn? What did you learn about yourself or your patterns? But again, it was not meant to be shared with anyone. You didn't have to read it in front of anyone. And what they did, because they were able to track these college students over time, they saw that they had decreased visits to healthcare providers. They had better health outcomes. And so it led people to reproduce these studies over and over and over again. And when I started looking at this for trauma, what I noticed is for many of us, if we've experienced something horrible in our childhood, or even adolescence or early adulthood, and it was awful, we tend to try to suppress it and not think about it. It gets locked into the shadow. But as you know, it's almost like setting up loops. What we now think of in PTSD is like there's a loop going between the amygdala and your prefrontal cortex and the hypothalamus and the your memory centers. And it's like instead of it being just put away in long-term storage, it's like on a continuous loop, making us hypervigilant, making us nervous or worried, always looking out for a similar threat. And so one of the things that I see as a parallel between narrative therapy and psychedelics is that they allow us to bring things up to the conscious forefront of our awareness, whether you're writing or whether it's in the psychedelic trip. And somehow, because the default mode network, the part of us that would go into judgment and criticism and all of that, takes a break, we often see or relive these things. Some people don't relive it, but we're basically having our adult awareness look at this information and recognize, oh God, that wasn't even my fault. Or I'm really sorry that that happened. And then it goes away into long-term storage. It stops the loop that PTSD would typically have. So we know that with psychedelics, and I think that's part of what's happening with narrative therapy. Now, you mentioned IFS, internal family systems. In my case, I had a lot of different parts. I had internalized the very critical voice of my father. I had also internalized another internal judge from my mother and other people at school. So I had all these various parts. I used to call them like the Supreme Court justices, always sitting around a big table, like judging and criticizing. And one of the things that happens when you start doing journaling is you can ask these critical parts of you, or any archetype, your wounded inner child. You could get in touch with your happy child if you could think back and access a part of you before your trauma that was actually happy. And one of the things that we did, I don't know if you did this in the recovery work, but we would often ask people to write with their dominant hand. So say I want to get in touch with this perfectionistic part, and I would write with I'm left-handed, so I'd write with my dominant hand, hey, I just want to connect and understand why is it that you just won't give me a break? And then with your non-dominant hand, you write. And yes, it's going to be scribbly unless you're perfectly ambidextrous, but that's not the point. It's not to judge, it's to allow this part of our unconscious to come forward. And many people in recovery would find that it helped. It allowed them to tap into these different parts, whether it was an inner child part that was just like, why won't you just let me play? Or, I feel scared. They were able to bring things up into the conscious mind that gave them a little bit of distance to say, okay, it's not me, it's a part of me that's still in this loop, that's still in this suffering. And it helps us to just rearrange it in our mind and put it where it needs to go into, sort of filing system, and to often reprocess those painful memories with a new understanding. I often say, when we look at these different parts of us, just because you have gone off to school, someone has a PhD or whatever, you as the adult, you've grown up, but these parts of you, they're still locked in time. They don't have the wisdom that we have as adults. And so we have to bring it to our conscious awareness and bring them up to date. So I find that narrative therapy, it's part of our prep and integration program. It's also, outside of psychedelics, it's what I do with my clients, because it does help them access information that they wouldn't normally have access to in a really healing way.
Awesome. And you're making me remember a book I read a while back, The Artist's Way. And you've probably done that, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners have as well, where there are some exercises that you write in the morning every day, the morning pages, and then, you use your non-dominant hand. And then there's also an exercise where you turn it upside down and you kind of draw things, because then you notice the detail more. And there's something about just doing things in a different way, because I think it makes us feel a bit more, maybe it touches upon our insecurity, and just, reassurance about, I can do things differently, and it doesn't have to be perfect, and kind of what is beauty, what is art, and why do I do this? Like, is it just to enjoy it, or is it to be the best at it? And I wanted to ask a question before we get to retreats. I definitely want to talk about them. We're talking about narrative therapy, being an author. I think you've written 20 books now. So what is going on there? Like, which parts of you does that tap into, and what is it about this writing process and your intention for creating these books for people? Could you talk through what's happening there?
Sure. Well, like you, I've been writing since I was a kid. For me, it did start off with journaling. And then I used to write some little fiction, little trashy romance in my high school days, believe it or not. But I think one of the archetypes that I took on very early is as a teacher and a coach. I got really good at school. I had the upside of having a very strict father was I learned to be a really good studier, a really good note taker, and I would excel. But then I would feel bad when other people weren't getting good grades, and so I offered to help them study and da da da. And it led me to just want to find these big ideas and find a way to bring them into really clear understanding for anyone. So I would write little guides. I wrote my first book when I was 30 and published with a major publisher in America, and then just sort of kept cranking them out. And I love it. I think what it taps into is it does tap into that teacher coach archetype. But more lately, it's also tapping into the artist in me, the part of me that wants to explore and to create. And as you know, I'm currently working on my next book, which is not, self-help nonfiction. In fact, it's fantasy fiction, still probably with a self-help angle, but also very, very spiritual and very magical. So I finally feel like I've got permission to bring forth all of me.
Yeah, there must be something about fiction that's kind of like the final frontier, because you can literally write anything. There's nothing that needs to hold you back. You can write absolutely anything. And I looked at this Dreamweaver's Legacy, your fictional book series that you're working on, and there's an enchanted forest there. So where is this enchanted forest, and how do we find this place? I'd love to kind of hear more about where that came from, the enchanted forest.
Well, to be honest, I sat with one of my plant teachers, fungal teachers, psilocybin. And I remember coming out of one of my journeys and feeling like I just need to be in touch with magic all of the time. Because as you know, when you're in a journey, if you're not like working out your trauma and crying your eyes out, sometimes it's beautiful and it's mystical. And I feel most like in tune with this sense of wonder and magic. And coming out of that journey, I said, how can I bring magic into my life every day? One of the things I was telling you before we started recording, a lot of people will have amazing visions or they'll get messages in their sacred medicine journeys and then they don't necessarily put them into action. But I've been one of these people I'm like, no, this has to take root. And as I asked this question, the idea was maybe I just need to take a magic potion. And so I started to go into my imagination. What would 1Drea need to do in order to fully have the confidence to just be magical all the time? So I'm like, all right, that's weird. I would definitely need a magic potion. So I started to imagine this story. I live right here on the Mediterranean where I walk my dog every morning. And I thought, oh, walking along the beach, I stumble across this bottle. And of course, I'm crazy and bold. So I drink this glowing potion inside. And it gives me access to this other world, this enchanted forest. And it's there that, the trees and the winds and the elements really speak like the language of the soul. And in this enchanted forest, I imagine that there had to be, a character, a protagonist, and her name is Elaria, and she is a master dream weaver. And as I started to embrace it, I was like, how cool is this? I could write a story and still use it for, self-help and teaching, but with more access to magic. Because I found myself, here in 2024, feeling like the weight of the world is at an all-time high, at least for me in my lifetime. And working with people who are healing from trauma, it's heavy. My work is heavy. I love it and it's heavy. And I thought if I could have a magical way, I don't want to just get on stage or on air and only spout, self-help stuff, or psychology. So that's how it all started. As I began writing, I happened to have this weekend where I was just writing. And I literally had to ask permission of one of my parts because I was thinking wouldn't it be so cool if we published this book and we shared it on social media, and all of a sudden I had this part show up well, how is that going to fit with the Dr. 1Drea brand? And I was like, wait a minute. I am 1Drea. There is one me. I am not going to be divided anymore between, okay, this is the doctor version of me, and this is the therapist version, and this is the artist. No, there's 1Drea. And I said, all right, I'm going to weave myself into the story. So this is a little meta because I'm writing about me, 1Drea, going into the forest, and there's this special grove of time where sort of the veil between the worlds is thin, and I actually get to interact with Elaria. So that's how it started. It's the first time in a few years that I've just had a flow of creativity, waking up in the morning, just writing. And I'm so excited to be able to bring that to the world and to not be constrained. Like you said, it's fiction. So yes, there can be magic, there can be potions, there can be animals that talk to us, there can be, magical talismans and other worldly beings. So yeah.
Oh, I'm so happy you are doing this and you found that space and all the parts of you have permission to to say yes. And there's definitely something about fiction. I'm guessing here, but I imagine most of us grown-ups only allow ourselves to read non-fiction. I do. I only ever do non-fiction. It's because we've got so much to learn, got to make the most of our life. It's almost like productivity, But gosh, fiction, and there's a beauty to it and a fantastical nature to it. I think we need more of that in our life, and it is more arty. It's more fluid and flowy and kind of dancey and expressive and colourful, that fiction piece. And I think we've lost quite a bit of that, I'd say.
I definitely know I had. Because I do value my work and I feel like it's my life purpose to help people heal and connect with who they really are. And like I said, it was getting pretty serious for me. I felt like I was going down this road of just serious heaviness. I listen to fiction. So like sometimes I'm reading, but it tends to put me to sleep because I am working a lot. But when I'm walking the dog or cooking dinner, I will often have an audiobook on that's fiction. And I love it because I get to go into another world and get immersed into characters. And I feel like I'm excited to bring this out. I mean, I don't know if my current followers will like it or if I'll tap into a new audience, but I think everyone could benefit from just imagining what would life be like if I had more magic and I wasn't so blocked and limited by my usual way of being or seeing things.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so let's take that magical energy that includes a lot of nature and transformation and talk about retreats, because there's definitely something magical about stepping into a retreat, preparing for it, that kind of anticipation and that heroic journey of kind of going into this space. Often that's, yeah, near the beach or mountains or rivers, whatever it might be, ocean. And there's something really magical about that. So I know you're putting quite a bit of your energy these days into supporting people going into retreats and holding space on retreats as well. So what does that retreat space mean to you, and why do you think it is so popular amongst many people that are using psychedelics around the world, if they are lucky enough to be able to afford them and make those kind of experiences happen in their life?
I think my love for retreats probably started working in the recovery space, because when people, whether it was substance use, eating disorders, or even burnout, I worked in retreat centers that cared for people in burnout. The idea of being able to retreat, to have all of your needs met, to finally let down your guard and get to the core of your wounding or whatever, it offers this beautiful opportunity. And so I think it was the first retreat that I started running was in 2009 in Mexico. And I love it because it gets people out of their known. It's a little bit out of their comfort zone. And then, of course, we take good care of them. And it just gives most people, it gives them permission to finally focus on themselves without it feeling selfish. I love doing retreats because we get to take advantage of the group effect. Our prep and integration program lasts 10 weeks. So they get to meet myself and the other facilitators as well as their fellow travelers on Zoom ahead of time. They're doing deep work, they're preparing for the journey. It does feel like a hero's journey because there's this intentionality, there's this support. And then they come and they step into, in this case, our space in the Netherlands, which is in the heart of nature. We're right in the middle of the countryside. They finally feel like, okay, I don't need to be attached to a device. I really get to just go within. And I love that space. I love that people get to learn from each other. They get to mirror one another. Many of us have wounding based on our family or attachment wounds. And so we need to heal and we need to recover in community. That's a lot of the people who do find success with 12 steps. They find that we recover together. And I think there's a certain magic that happens. A lot of my colleagues in this space say the group is the medicine. Yes, we take these magical molecules, but the group brings its own sort of medicine. So I love that. I love that opportunity for people. In most cases, we do a 5-day retreat, so people get 2 journeys with psilocybin truffles. We do a shorter kind of drop-in retreat, which is 3 days, where there's just one ceremony, kind of as a refresher, or for therapists that just like want to experience these because they have clients that are going through it. And I find that container allows for magic. I don't belong to any indigenous lineage, although I come from a line of medicine women from South America. And so we bring in the idea of ritual and ceremony. And that too, I think, is healing for people to start to tap into these natural rhythms of the body, natural rhythms of the earth, and like honoring the elements in ourselves. And I find that container just, it opens up so much for people. And I really, really, truly consider it a privilege to be able to facilitate that for people And it's one of the gifts of the year, is to be able to just know that I'm part of what is probably going to be one of the biggest transformations for people.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a really special feeling to be sharing sacred space with a group of people. What kinds of people have you been tending to work with on retreats? So where are they coming from, and what are some of their intentions for for going into that space?
Each of our retreats generally has a theme. So we've done a sacred feminine retreat just for women. Last year it was all about self love and body positivity. So a lot of people were coming, whether they had trauma in their past or sexual abuse or eating disorders. The women were really coming with this intention to like deeply connect with self. We also do one for business people, our visionary leaders retreat, so that they can sort of break through these limiting beliefs and like get back in touch with magic and creativity and bringing this more whole and authentic version of themselves to business. We're also doing one for healthcare providers. As you know, healthcare providers are facing a lot of burnout. We always have been, and definitely since COVID, it's on the rise. And so there are some beliefs and new studies showing that psilocybin can be useful in helping to reset the brain. And so if you can get away on a retreat and experience psilocybin safely and in a facilitated way, that can help us recover from burnout. And then we just have general open retreats where anyone could come. They don't necessarily have to have a health crisis. It might just be for self love or self exploration. So everyone kind of comes from different places. We've had people from Africa, from the UK, from the United States, Scandinavia. So we really make it open to everyone, and we have a pretty generous scholarship program so that we can make it accessible to folks as well.
Sounds amazing. And you've been working with Jessica Lagarde, so I just want to shout out to her. She was
Yes,
one of our
Jess.
vital students. She's amazing.
She is a gift to be able to hold space. And we also have another beautiful facilitator that Jess introduced me to, Renee Ava. So we're getting back together again this year. And I have to say, like being able to have live musicians, Renee Ava and her voice is just amazing. And Jess brings in all of this somatic wisdom. I also sing as well, but bringing able to bring all of that into this sacred space is so so powerful.
Amazing. So you do a bit of singing yourself on these retreats.
Yes, I
Wow,
do. I have, over
very
the
cool.
last couple of years, I've been able to bring my voice into ceremony in a different way. I've also written poems that I share, and singing in ceremony is so different. I mean, it's a different. I don't know if you've ever heard this, when there's people singing at a bar or a nightclub, and they say, keep on drinking because the more you drink, the better I sound. And I find that there's a part of me that also feels like in the medicine space, when you bring intention, my voice isn't perfect, but there's a certain magic that happens with the voice being able to transmit energy and help move emotion. So it's been really freeing for me personally as an artist to be able to bring my voice to ceremony more.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's amazing to hear. Um, I want to ask you a bit about another part of your work that you're offering, one of the many called PRISM sessions. So that stands for Psychedelic Retreats, Integration and Spiritual Mentoring. So yeah, there's quite a lot there to unpack. Can you, just introduce us to what is PRISM and what's the genesis of how it helps folks?
Mhm. Well, I found that many people are finding me on the internet. I'm kind of all over YouTube. I've shared a lot of my journey. And even if they're not coming to sit and retreat with me, they've they've been asking for private sessions. And so, over the last couple of years, I've helped people prepare for their own sacred medicine journeys, whether they're flying somewhere or preparing even to just do ketamine. I found that using the same framework that I used with people with addiction and eating disorders, a framework that's called the cornerstone process. It's this biopsychosocial emotional um, framework. I use that to help people do the shadow work, do the self discovery work, do the narrative therapy or life writing work. And then they can really feel confident when they're going into their journeys. And it also helps in integration. I also do private ceremonies. I do love the groups, but we can offer PRISM ceremonies in the Netherlands for people who just they're afraid, and oftentimes there's really good reasons. The level of trauma or the nervous system dysregulation, some people don't want to be in a group for their first journey. And so being able to do that is really helpful. And then, spiritual mentoring and supervised microdosing is another service that we added to PRISM sessions as people are, again, they're finding ways of growing their own mushrooms or getting their hands on things legally, and they just need support and guidance. So that's what I'm doing.
Amazing. And there's a piece of that work I feel that we can just zoom into a little bit. And it's coming from something you said a bit earlier around we've been through many heroes' journeys. Like when we look back on our lives, it's like, oh yeah, there was one. Oh yeah, there was another one. We're going in and out of challenges and transformations. And so I think part of that thread that carries us through those heroes' journeys is resilience. And I think part of our self-love acquisition might be the recognition of our own resilience and the validation of how much we've been through already, and how, some of our faults are there for reasons, as kind of protective mechanisms of kind of coping and defending ourselves, and just surviving often. And so when I feel like there's something really powerful around what is resilience. And human beings, we're amazing. Yes, we make mistakes and we do destroy things, but we're beautiful. And when they write a story about our brief time on this planet and this universe, there's just so much beauty there. There's so much we've been through, and we just pick ourselves back up and we put ourselves back into like, okay, let's move on. Let's look to the future. Let's build something new. Let's heal that. Let's forgive this. Let's believe in something more. And so for me, one word is resilience around that just comes up. And I think we just, to give ourselves credit and self-love for we're alive, full of scars and wounds and traumas and insecurities and fears and doubts, but we are beautiful and strong, amazing people. And it's better for us to recognize that and to know that we belong here, and we deserve to help each other move forward and to believe in the future. So what does that mean to you, some of those feelings that we're bringing into this space between us here?
Very well said. Early in my career, 23 years ago, back to that IOP, I really became curious about the people who went through our program and took off thriving versus the people who were circling around PTSD. And that's what led me to do research on resilience. And the way I define resilience is it is our inborn ability to bounce back, to return to a baseline. And each of us is born with this capacity. We are all born with the capacity to be resilient. In my research, I found that there were 10 traits. There are 10 specific traits the most resilient people have. And we all have the capacity for them. We don't just necessarily use them all the time, but we can learn how to use them. And so if resilience is about bouncing back or returning to a baseline after adversity, trauma, illness, injury, or accidents, that's great. We all have that ability. And I also discovered that some people could bounce forward after adversity, and that's post-traumatic growth. And that's about what you were talking about. Is there are 5 domains to post-traumatic growth. The 5 domains are coming out of adversity and feeling like I've got some strength here. Like I am resilient. I'm stronger than I knew I was. Or recognizing that we're connected to something greater. A lot of people will go through that hero's journey and realize if I didn't die, there must have been something that was keeping me going. So that spiritual development is another aspect. Um, the third aspect is deeper relationships or more profound relationships. You can come through adversity and find that there were certain people you could really lean on or certain people that you really value. An appreciation for life. So many people who came through addiction recovery would tell me, like, if I lived, there must be a reason. And they could see the fifth thing, new possibilities for themselves and a new appreciation for life. And so these are things that the reason why I love narrative therapy is because it highlights these aspects of resilience that we may not have recognized, and it sets us up for post-traumatic growth. And all of us have that. We all have that ability. That's why I kind of drill so hard on this concept, because even if you've come through life feeling like a victim, feeling like the world is against you, you can turn that around.
Thank you. I love that you brought in post-traumatic growth. I've been wanting to write about it for a year or so now. And I think there's something really key to it, especially because we've all been through COVID together. I feel like we've learned a lot, we've aged a lot, and learned a lot. But yeah, we've grown a lot because we had to, and we've been through a lot. We've lost a lot through that, but there's some growth there. And a couple of years ago, I saw this graph, 1Drea. I don't know if you've seen it. I love graphs and PDFs and tables and charts, but there's a graph it shows people that have post-traumatic stress disorder and that in a sense don't break through it, and it kind of has that more debilitating effect. And then there's another graph that shows the causality over time of post-traumatic growth and how it pushes out the curve of your potentiality, of your evolution, of your happiness and your sense of meaning and thriving in life through going through that trauma. Because of that trauma, it's enabled that person to bounce back higher than where they would have been before then. And obviously we're not saying that anyone wants trauma to happen, and to put pressure on people to expect that any one outcome has to happen in a marvelous way through the trauma that we have. But there's this potentiality there around what the reverberations of our trauma can give to us if we are able to kind of meet them within ourselves, to love them and to give them time, and to believe in our ability to kind of metamorphosize those kind of ripples within us to grow. And I think, that there's quite a lot of that theme that we've spoken about today, but I just love that you brought post-traumatic growth in there. So it's something I want to learn more about and really, I think, build into some of my work. What's your sense of how we can amplify post-traumatic growth in our work?
It is the subject of something else that I'm writing, which is this course on using the cornerstone process for psychedelic prep and integration, because psychedelics really give us access to enhance those 10 traits of resilience, and they set us up for post-traumatic growth. The thing I just want to just say for people is post-traumatic stress disorder or suffering can coexist with post-traumatic growth. Some people think that, if I'm doing bad, I'm never going to get to the growth aspect. Just because you're suffering or really challenged doesn't mean you won't get to the growth period. So for me, I started recognizing these parallels when I was doing. I did the IPI program for ketamine, MDMA, and psilocybin. And during that training, as I was looking through study after study after study about psychedelics, I'm like, this is pinging some of the same outcomes from the post-traumatic growth research. People saying that they have these mystical experiences, people who were maybe even atheists, all of a sudden saying, there's something, I may not call it God, but there's this sense of spiritual development or a spiritual meaning. And then people coming out of their psychedelics and also feeling like they've got greater value for their relationships. People coming through psychedelic journeys going, wow, I am stronger than I realized. Like that medicine broke me down and I made it to the other side. And so each of these domains of post-traumatic growth can really be mirrored in looking at the studies on a variety of different psychedelic molecules and breath work and holotropic states. So stay tuned. It looks like we're both going to be writing on the same stuff.
Awesome. That sounds great. And I've got one other thing that I really want to explore with you. And I know you mentioned it before, and that's a project around microdosing that you're also working on in some of your spare time. That sounds really interesting. And I know, it's a bit of a buzzword nowadays, microdosing. But having spoken to, hundreds of people, It is real, and whether that's the placebo effect or not, or partially, the placebo effect is real, and I think that speaks to our potentiality as well. Like, what's your take on microdosing and that kind of debate and controversy, and in a sense, but also what's your interest that you are hoping to open up in this project that you're working on?
Sure. Well, I have to give credit to my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Jill Stalker in the US. Um, I, during COVID, I legally obtained some psilocybin truffles, which are, I can get here in Europe. And I started microdosing, mainly because I was curious. I'd heard about people in Silicon Valley having increased creativity and yada, yada. And I was like, okay, I want to try. And I started taking them. I wasn't telling anyone except my doctor, Dr. Jill. And I was telling her things that were coming up. And of course, she has her doctor hat on and she's like listening to me over the weeks. And she said, you need to be blogging about this. And I didn't want to, but I was already tracking my responses in my journal. But what I noticed is it coincided with the time that I was put on hormones for entering menopause. And again, once I got into really looking at research, I was like, wow, some of these molecules, like psilocybin, that turns into psilocin, that's pinging these 5-HT2A receptors, that is increasing brain derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, it's increasing blood flow, it's doing all of these things, boosting mood, for many people, reducing anxiety. And I thought, isn't that interesting? If you look at the research on estradiol, bioidentical hormone replacement. It increases blood flow to the brain, helps with cognition, helps with mood, also leads to BDNF. And I'm like, maybe there's something there. So I started doing research to see if anyone else was writing about microdosing for menopause. Couldn't find very much at all. So I ended up publishing a very short review paper on it, which you can find online. And then it made me wonder, like, well, who else is doing this? Are there any other people that I can connect with? And there are very few. There's anecdotal stuff out there. But what I envisioned was creating a survey where women around the world could follow along by entering some of their data, tracking their progress. And this is what we're going to do this spring. We're going to launch a study. It's going to be an open study where people can share what they've been on and what their responses are, and we'll follow them over months to see if there's anything there. Ideally, what we will get to in the future is in countries where it's legal for women who are already thinking that they might like to try microdosing, either for menopause or other women's health issues like premenstrual dysphoria disorder. What they could actually do is obtain legally these psilocybin truffles so that we know exactly which strain, what dosage, the growing conditions, because these are the problems right now. We do have people who are chiming in on forums and they're saying, yeah, I took a half a gram or I took 100 milligrams, but they don't always remember, okay, what strain was it? Who did you buy it from? Like, what were the growing conditions? Like all of these things that as a clinician, we would want to know, is there a standard response? Is one strain better than another? Is one strain worse than another? So that's what we're excited to do, is to really start putting some scientific rigor. And we might find that it doesn't help. Maybe I and the few other people I've talked to, maybe we're just the weirdos. But I tend to think that there might be something to it.
That must feel so bloody good that you are putting your science hat back on. And
Yeah.
yeah, you're doing some citizen science here, and definitely with microdosing, you need some standardization in order to make some kind of qualified, outcome and conclusion, interpret that data. So that's brilliant, really good idea. But yeah, how does that feel to have that science hat back on, and really looking at putting this out there in a more kind of democratized way?
Well, it feels good. And I'm also, I'm connecting with other women in the field. I've got some doctors and therapists in different countries who've pledged their support and they want to support it, and either by sending their patients to fill out these forms or to engage. And that feels good. We also have some people in my Alchemy of the Soul apprenticeship program who want to get into research. So, having our own cohort of citizen scientists to get involved, it does feel good. It feels like I'm giving back in some way to this beautiful field that has helped me so immensely.
Amazing. Segue here. Come with me. So we're talking about the hats that you're wearing, and one of those is a scientist's hat. There was a book I read a while back. I'm not sure if you've heard of Edward de Bono, The Six Thinking Hats, and how there's different colored hats, and each one is in a sense a different cognitive ability or emotional capacity or a way of approaching a certain problem and making a decision in a certain way. How much I am kind of forward thinking and in control of it, how analytical I might be, how creative and expansive I might be. So the blue hat is more process oriented, the red hat's more feelings oriented, for example. So it sounds to me like you've got just a plethora of hats, basically a hat shop. And you are just basically, you're a milliner, you're making new hats for yourself. And I think there's something just beautiful there, 1Drea, that the ability to just say yes, just yes, to so many different ways without limiting ourselves about the number of hats we can wear, what colors it can be. And when I want to just take one off or put one on or combine them together, it's really empowering. And once you get into that flow state, yeah, it is a bit limitless. And I think it is really expansive and it is inspirational. So as a final question, I wanted to ask you, are there any hats yet that you haven't told us about before we wrap up? Any other, things you're working on or, parts of your life that you love talking about that we didn't get to?
Yes, there's one more.
Okay. Tell us.
Well, I've been an entrepreneur literally since my teenage years. But as I shared with you, in one of my ayahuasca journeys, I saw a vision. I saw a vision of a product that I had been thinking of since my early 20s, and it involves fragrance. Early on in my medical career, I told you about this wellness center, and we had a holistic spa. One of the things that we offered was a certain aromatherapy, facial and massage. And I remember giving a facial to a woman, and I'm giving her the aromatherapy experience, and I see a tear roll down her face. And I'm like, what have I done? Obviously, me thinking I did something wrong. And I said, what's going on? And she was like, oh, that smell, that reminds me of my grandmother. And she just got so filled with emotion. And it just really struck me like how powerful scent is. All of our senses can be really powerful. And because this ayahuasca journey so gave me such a clear vision of this project, I shared it with the man who is now my husband, and he's like, yes, let's do it. And so my next hat is creating a spiritual well-being company that involves essences. Essences created here in the perfume capital of the world. Many of the flowers and the greatest perfumes are created here in Grasse in France. And so we are celebrating the release of 3 fragrances. One of them is Divine MF, and they're perfumes, diffuser oils, and candles. And the whole concept is by tuning into the fragrance, you're going to set an intention for the day that will alter your energy, your aura, your vibration. You'll also get a QR code to listen to guided meditations. Again, tapping into this idea of ritual. So you tune into the scent, you tune into your intention, you drift away in a guided meditation, you pick up your journal, and there's journal prompts. Of course, I had to go with the narrative therapy. So you're really doing this whole somatic and emotional transformation or ritual process. And we mentioned the Dreamweaver's legacy just a couple of months ago, before we placed our very first order for our first shipment. I thought, it's magic, right? I don't want to be too woo-woo, but if you could change your energy through your intention, through a scent, through engaging in a ritual, that would be magical. And so with every purchase, people are going to get a little scroll from Elaria, from the magical enchanted forest, where she's going to be giving them insights on how to set up these rituals, how to use the elements, and how to really embody whatever it is that you're trying to bring into your world. And because my husband and I are really, really passionate about being able to give back this company will be able to set up an artist in residence program. The arts have been so fundamental in my healing. And so we want to have an artist in residence program where someone could really just be immersed in the arts and not have to worry about money. And we'll also be giving a portion of our profits to invest, kind of like microloans, microfinance, not with any of the sort of negative downside to that. We're not trying to become a financial institution. We really just want to give people the resources they need and the entrepreneurial help that they might need. So I'm super excited about this hat because once again, it allows me to bring in all of these other parts of me, the creative part, the spiritual part, the writer and the artist. So stay tuned. It's coming soon.
Amazing. Yeah, that's very, very creative how you've blended so many different pieces. And I love that you've put that, kind of aspirational journal prompt in there with each bottle. It's a bit like, the tea bags when you have the, the little kind of mantra that's
The
there.
little message.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice because we started last year in our retreats and we gave all of the women who came to our sacred feminine retreat a little tester bottle just to see which ones did they like. And, we'll have candles and diffusers on all of our retreats so that people can already start to tune into this energy. And I'm really excited because then other people who are running retreats or doing healing sessions can have some of these magical essences as well.
Yeah, and there's no doubting that aromatherapy, is an ancient practice, and using incense is an ancient practice of many, many traditions around the world, and it helps us just to tap into that sacred aspect and for the energy, within to open up, and definitely in group spaces too. I think that's how it can, when we're all experiencing the same incense or aromas, kind of part of the setting, it helps to open up. So, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
For me as well. Thank you. I'm so excited that we got to reconnect.
Yeah, thanks a lot, 1Drea. So for folks that want to find out more, and we'll definitely put everything we can in our show notes. So don't worry if you can't squeeze everything in. But yeah, just direct folks if they want to hear more about your work and get in contact. Where should they go?
Well, I'm all over social media. You can find me online at 1Drea.com. That's the number 1, DREA.com. I'm on YouTube. I do a ton of free masterclasses. So just check out Pennington Media. And yeah, I'm everywhere you can imagine. Well, okay, maybe not much on TikTok, but everywhere else.
Yeah, we haven't tapped that market yet. We're not sure if we want to. No problem. All right. Well, honestly, this has been a pleasure and an honor. Thanks for your work and for leading the way. It's, blessings for you, 1Drea.
Thank you. Many blessings to you.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. God bless.